Welcome back, guys. Original Josh at Atlantic Pressure Washers. Today we're going to go over our Platinum Winterization package. A couple steps that we went over in our previous videos were the freeze protection of the pump, running either compressed air through the pump to purge all the water out, or running antifreeze through the pump. So we've done those steps already, as well as stabilizing the fuel in the engine. So those we've already done. The rest of the package is going to include changing of the engine oil, changing of the pump oil, replacing the spark plug, and fogging the cylinder. So we're going to get ready and do those steps right now. So for our first step, we're going to change the pump oil. There are many ways that this can be done. For this particular model, there is a drain plug on the bottom of the pump. I'm actually going to take off the back end of the pump so that we can also inspect the connecting rods, which is not a necessary step in an oil change, but as part of our premium package, we're going to inspect those just to make sure that there isn't any imminent failure on the horizon. So we'll start by taking out the 4 screws in the back of the faceplate. Be aware this is going to allow the oil to drain the fastest. On some models of pumps, you might choose not to do this because if they use a paper gasket, you will have to have a replacement. On this particular pump, it has an O-ring, so we can just reuse that. As you can see, that allows for the oil to drain out very quickly. We can reach in there and wipe out any of the residual oil that's remaining. So the oil that's draining out, if the oil is milky, this is important to wipe out the crankcase because any of that residual milky oil that's present inside can cause your new fresh oil to look milky as well. Of course, as we all know, the condition of your pump oil is an indicator of how well it's running and if there's any service that's necessary. So right here, you'll see your connecting rods on your crankshaft. We like to see just a little bit of wiggle in the connecting rod on the crankshaft. So we don't want to see too much of a sloppy movement from back and forth. If it is starting to get too loose right there, then your pump may need to be majorly overhauled or in many cases replaced. Take the dipstick out, wipe that down. And I promise to do my best to try not to make a mess. We don't want to forget the back of the housing plate. So you'll notice if the oil in your pump has never been changed before, as this one is the first oil change for this pump, there is some metallic essence to the oil, which is normal for a new pump's break-in period. It's not something to be concerned about. We'll take a closer look at that in the drain pan once we're done wiping this out. All right, so now we've got the back end of the crankcase all nice and wiped out. We like to hit the sight glass so that when we put everything back together, if the oil does start to get milky from water getting into the oil from the seal failure, we'll be able to see it. So we're going to go ahead and reassemble this. Now we want to tighten these up. We don't want to over tighten them. So if you're doing this at home, I recommend using a ratchet to make the final torque. If you're an OCD mechanic, you can certainly find the torque specs on the parts breakdown for the pump, which we can provide. So there you go. We've We've drained the oil out of the pump. We'll fill it here in just a moment. Here we can see the metallic pearlescence of the breakdown of the pump in the oil from the break-in period. That's nothing to be concerned about. What we don't want to find, which we're looking at now, is we don't want to see this look like coffee with cream. If you're starting to get some water mixture in there, that's what you'll start to see. Starts out a little cloudy, but it'll eventually get real milky. And if you let it go for too long, you'll be cleaning whipped cream out of the back of your pump. Now we're done with our pump oil extraction. The oil in the crankcase of the pump and the engine is strictly for the purpose of lubrication. So on our pump assembly, there are typically markings on the sight glass that shows you that it should be filled to the halfway point. We don't want to go overfilled, because then when the pump is running, the dipstick has a breather to it. If you overfill the pump, it's going to start spewing out the top, which makes a big mess, and instead of cleaning, you'll be making a mess in someone's driveway. So for this model of Comet pump, it's not going to take a quart of oil. We're probably at about 20 ounces of oil, plus or minus. Those measurements are available for the pump model, depending on what your pressure washer is. If you look that up, you can get the specific spec. If you're, like I said, OCD about filling it up just to the right mark. Once you do fill it up to that halfway mark, there's also markings typically on the dipstick. You've got a min and max. When adding pump oil, do it very slowly. If you add too quickly, it'll overfill. Very easy to overfill. Once you see it start in the window, I usually stop to make sure that the oil is finished leveling out inside the housing. Right here, we can see that it's ever so slightly below the mark. So there you go. We're at the halfway mark, and we've used a little less than half a quart, so a little less than a pint, probably about 14 ounces of oil. And right here you can see that the oil level is filled up right to the halfway point. And our pump oil change is complete. Next we have the engine oil. On various models of pressure washers, especially the ones that we sell in our store, there are, in many cases, a drain hose for easier access for draining the oil out of the pump. In this case, it doesn't have that on the pump or the engine, so we're just going to pull the plug from the base of the crankcase. There's one on either side of the pump, and most models of pressure washers also have a cutaway in the frame so that when the plug is removed, the oil can drain right through to the bottom. So we have here a slightly larger drain pan than we use for the pump oil. We want to use a larger one because this crankcase uses a whole quart of oil, and if we were to use the quart-sized pan, a lot of times it wants to overflow. Once it's broke loose, the drain plug tends to be pretty easy to spin. You should be able to get it by hand. So right here we have the sealing plug, or the sealing washer for the drain plug. Make sure you don't lose that. I usually end up dropping into the oil, so you end up having to fish it out, which is not too much fun. But like I said, keep an eye on that. Once the plug gets there. So you find with the small opening at the bottom of the crankcase, it drains pretty slow. So once you get it broken loose, you can take out the fill plug or the dipstick, and that'll help it drain faster. It's also helpful if you run the engine for a little while to heat the engine oil up and drain it out. Once again, this is our first oil change since this machine was put into the rental pool. So the oil's still, it's it's not too thick coming out, still relatively warm outside, so this draining process shouldn't take too long. All right, so we took a little break so that we could let the oil completely drain out of the crankcase. Just waiting for it to stop dripping, that's all. So we got a little residue here, we're gonna wipe that clean. Make sure that our drain plug is also clean. Reinstall it. And making sure that the sealing washer is in place. If you're lazy like me, ratchet wrench works wonders. Especially for those tiny, hard to get spots. Not hard to spin, just hard to spin with oily fingers. Okay, we got the drain plug threaded all the way in. We want to give it a nice little torque, but do not over torque it. Remember, the crankcase is cast aluminum, so it's not hard to strip the threads if you're too hard on that. There we go, we got our drain plug back in. That is very important before you fill it with oil. So, common mistake with changing the oil in the engine, or filling the engine with oil, I should say, is that because the funnel goes in at such an angle that's easy to spill, many do-it-yourselfers tip the engine up so that it's easier to pour it in. However, that makes it very easy to overfill the engine with oil, which we don't want. When the oil is filled in the crankcase, it should only come to the base of the threads inside this fill port. So what you can do, if you have the ability, there's another fill on the opposite side. You can fill from either one, and while you're filling from one side, you can keep an eye on the other just to make sure that it's not going to overflow. But for your GX390s, 340s, this 15 horsepower engine, we know that this takes one full quart of oil. So there's no measuring necessary if you just use a quart container. Mike's going to come in here and take a closer look. You can see right inside the crankcase fill tube, we've got oil capacity just to the base of the threads. All right, so now that we've got the crankcase completely filled, we're going to go ahead and wipe off our dipstick, reinstall it, and make sure that we tighten, make sure that you check both sides. Because if you run the engine without the dipsticks tight, it makes quite the mess. All right, so now we're done with the oil change in the pump and the oil change in the engine. Now we're going to take a break, spin the engine around, and get ready to change the spark plug and fog the cylinder. All right, we got the engine spun around so that we can show you the spark plug removal, the fogging of the cylinder, and then installing the new spark plug. So taking off the spark plug cap can be a little tricky, so be cautious when you go to pull it off. It's not advised to use channel locks or pliers to remove this from the spark plug because it is plastic and has a tendency to crack. So best just to use a nice firm pull. So here's your spark plug cap or connector, and that just plugs right into the back of the spark plug. It's threaded into the cylinder. We just pull that off and move it out of the way. The spark plug that's most common in your Honda engines, especially for your single cylinder units, is going to be a 13/16 socket. You can use a spark plug wrench if you've got one. The Honda engines are generally supplied with this spark plug wrench, and we'll just use this one for this particular instance. Use just a long screwdriver, break loose the snugness of the spark plug. There we go, pull out the spark plug. This one doesn't look like it's in bad shape, but we're going to replace it anyway, just preventative maintenance. As I said, this is a fairly new machine. So this unit has some off-brand spark plug. Your Honda engine, single cylinder, are most commonly going to use a BPR 5ES plug. We use the Honda brand plug. You can get a comparable plug from your auto parts store. Just cross-reference this with their guide. All right, so down in the cylinder is where we want to fog the engine. So we're going to use just standard fogging oil. You can get this from your auto parts store as well. We use the Stay-Build brand. And with the straw extension, we're going to spray it down into the cylinder. Once we have sprayed the cylinder, we're going to pull the recoil to cycle the engine, get the cylinder to go up and down. It's going to wipe some of that fogging oil in the cylinder to make sure it's completely coated. And that's what's going to give you the best protection for the engine over the winter storage season. All right, so we've sprayed some fogging oil into the engine cylinder. Taking just a couple slow pulls, cycle the cylinder a few times. And now we've fogged the engine. This also can be done through the air intake on the engine while it is running. In fact, that's a common method for boat motors, is to fog the engine and stall it out in that fashion. With your pressure washer, it's just easier to spray it down inside the cylinder. Like I said, it coats the rings and the seals on the piston so that the piston walls don't get corroded or oxidized from any kind of chemicals you might have been using through the pressure washing season that are picked up by the air filter and feeding that, the engine has been breathing those types of vapors, which can cause accelerated wear to your cylinder. So with our Honda spark plugs pre-gapped, very important to hand thread the spark plug into the cylinder. Once again, remember the crankcase is cast aluminum, and it's very easy to cross thread the threads of the spark plug, and then you'll be in a big trouble trying to tap it out. And once you get it threaded in most of the way, you can finish hand tightening it with your spark plug wrench. Once it gets down to the point where it's not spinning any further, just going to give it a little bit of a snug. You'll feel the washer collapse on the spark plug. And it doesn't have to be super tight, you just want it snug. So there you have it. The cylinder is protected. We've sprayed it with our fogging oil. Put the new spark plug in. Reinstall your spark plug cap. There you have it. We're all wrapped up. All right, so to recap, we've gone over our platinum package for winterization. We have protected the pump from freeze by flushing the pump with antifreeze, and so that's going to, or flushing the pump with antifreeze, so that's going to protect your seals, your plungers, any of the surrounding plumbing from expansion during the freeze. We've also changed the oil in the pump as well as the oil in the engine. We have stabilized the fuel for long-term storage, and we've also changed the spark plug and fogged the engine. So we are completely protected from the winter freeze for our cold water pressure washers. So as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Come visit us down in Linthicum Heights at APW, and don't forget, turn the water on.